Marcus Talon sat quietly at the back of the transport ship, gazing out at the stars. His military days were behind him, and the only battles he fought now were against boredom. The quiet life of a civilian had suited him, until the signal arrived. It came like a whisper at first, just a blip on the radar, a faint pulse of energy. No one thought much of it. But as the frequency grew louder, the science teams on the outer colonies took notice. It wasn't like any signal they had encountered before. It wasn't from any known alien species. It wasn't even a human transmission. It was a call from something older, something forgotten. And it was only just beginning to make its presence known. Marcus had heard the news reports, of course. Everyone had. The signal had sparked speculation, heated debates, and endless theories. Scientists argued about its origin, diplomats speculated on its meaning, and the military grew wary. They hadn't expected something like this. No one had. Yet every passing hour brought new reports of strange events. People in remote colonies claiming to have strange dreams, vivid images of ancient gods from another time. Then the oddest thing happened. A handful of humans began to feel different. Marcus, who had grown up with stories of humanity's ancient heroes, didn't believe in gods. He'd seen too much death in his life to believe in anything beyond the here and now. But then he felt it. It wasn't just an ache or a fleeting moment of dizziness. No, it was something far deeper, more unsettling. It was like his very cells were vibrating, his muscles waking up as if they'd been dormant for centuries. At first, he dismissed it. The mind can play tricks, especially when you're haunted by memories of war. But it didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger. His body felt invincible, stronger, faster, more aware than it had ever been. His senses sharpened, his reflexes quickened. He could hear whispers of thoughts from others, see movements before they happened. He couldn't explain it, but there was no denying it. Something inside him was changing, and it wasn't just happening to him. Across the galaxy, similar changes were taking place. A quiet boy from a mining colony on Alcarnine lifted a steel beam off his crushed mother with his bare hands. A young woman, once too shy to speak in front of a crowd, suddenly stood up in front of her peers and recited ancient war strategies from forgotten histories, strategies she had never learned. And on Earth, Marcus wasn't alone in feeling the power surge through him. The signal was more than just a call. It was a key, unlocking something deep within humanity's genetic code. Humanity wasn't just a species anymore. It was a force to be reckoned with. A forgotten legacy had been reawakened, and now there was no turning back. Marcus didn't know it yet, but his life, humanity's life, was about to change forever, and he was going to be at the center of it all. As the transport ship touched down on Earth's outskirts, Marcus felt the weight of an ancient presence stirring within him. Whatever this power was, whatever it meant, one thing was certain. The war gods of old were waking up, and they would not be silent for long. Dr. Ilara Ward stood in front of the massive holoscreen in her laboratory, staring at the data streams. The signal that had reached humanity from the farthest reaches of space was more than a puzzle. It was a revelation. A genetic code, older than any known civilization, had been hidden in the very DNA of every human being. It was there, dormant, waiting to be awakened. Her hands trembled as she navigated through the archaic alien texts and genetic sequences. The more she uncovered, the more she realized the magnitude of what was happening. The war gods of humanity's distant past weren't myths. They were real, and their power was embedded deep within the human genome. The ancient texts, painstakingly decoded, spoke of a time when humanity wasn't just a fledgling species on a single planet, but an empire spanning entire star systems. These ancestors weren't just explorers. They were conquerors, rulers of vast territories with godlike abilities. Their powers were forged in the heat of cosmic wars, battles that spanned millennia. But as their empire grew, so did their arrogance, and they waged wars not just against other species but amongst themselves. A catastrophic event, known only as the Fall, unleashed untold destruction. Fearing their own power, the surviving gods sealed themselves away, locking their abilities deep within the human race, where it would lie dormant until the time was right. That time, Elara realized with a mix of awe and dread, was now. Marcus Talon was living proof of this awakening. Elara had heard about the retired soldier who had single-handedly turned the tide of the Thorvok invasion. His feats had been nothing short of legendary. But Marcus was only one of many. She had seen the reports. A young girl in the mining colony of Alcarnine who lifted a steel beam with her bare hands, a farmer in the cradle system who outran a wild beast, and countless others whose abilities were becoming impossible to ignore. But the most disturbing part was the nature of these powers. It wasn't just strength or speed. Some of the awakened humans displayed heightened senses. Others showed an almost supernatural understanding of ancient combat techniques, fighting styles, and tactics that hadn't been practiced for thousands of years. The war gods had left a legacy, and that legacy was taking root in humanity once more. As Elara analyzed the genetic sequences further, one terrifying possibility became clear. These war gods hadn't just fought in the past. They ruled. They had been the commanders, the leaders, the beings who shaped the very galaxy. And they were about to rise again, not as gods in the conventional sense, but as superhuman warriors with the power to reshape civilization. Her thoughts were interrupted by a buzzing sound, and her screen flickered to life with an urgent message from the Earth Defense Command. "Dr. Ward, we need you. There's been a breakthrough. Marcus Talon. He's exhibiting abilities we've never seen before. We need to understand how deep this goes." Elara's heart skipped a beat. She had feared this moment, when humanity's new powers would reveal themselves, not as gifts, but as a curse. If humanity's war gods truly rose, would they be able to control their power, or would they destroy everything in their path, just as their ancestors had? One thing was certain. Humanity had unleashed something ancient, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Xorvok fleet had been advancing for weeks. Their ships, black as voids and heavily armored, cut through the stars with relentless purpose, and their war cries reverberated across the galaxy's communication channels. For years, humanity's defenses had kept them at bay, but the Xorvok were clever, patient. They knew how to exploit weakness, and humanity's newfound power was the perfect opening. Marcus Talon stood in the command center of the newly formed Earth fleet, his eyes scanning the data coming in from the front lines. The invasion had begun in full force, with the Thorvok launching simultaneous attacks on several human colonies. Elara Ward, now working closely with the military to study the war gods' abilities, had just confirmed the worst. The signal wasn't just awakening latent powers in humans, it was also attracting enemies, powerful, terrifying enemies. But what the Xorvok didn't know was that humanity wasn't just fighting back with ships and weapons anymore. They had something far more dangerous. Marcus had become the poster child of this new era. His own awakening had been slow, creeping, until one fateful moment when he had unintentionally torn apart a military base, his strength unleashed in a moment of panic. Since then, he'd been training, learning to control his newfound abilities. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something more. Faster, stronger, more intuitive than any human could ever be. His reflexes were sharp enough to dodge lasers in midair, and his senses had become so heightened that he could anticipate enemy movements before they happened. But that power had come with a weight, a responsibility he still wasn't sure how to bear. "Captain Talon, the Xorvok fleet is within range of the Korath colony," a voice said, pulling Marcus from his thoughts. The comm officer looked at him, awaiting orders. "Prepare to engage," Marcus replied, his voice steady, but with a sharp edge to it. "Deploy all war gods into the field. We're not letting them get any closer." The first test of humanity's new power had arrived. Marcus led a small fleet of human ships into the heart of the battle. But this time, he wasn't just commanding from behind the scenes. As the ships dropped out of warp, Marcus could feel the pull of his ancestors' blood rushing through his veins. The power inside him grew stronger the closer they got to the enemy. It was as if the very air was charged with it. The Exorvok ships came into view, their intimidating silhouettes against the backdrop of the stars. They were ready for a fight, but they had no idea who they were up against. "Ready weapons," Marcus ordered. He stood at the helm of his own ship, his eyes fixed on the Exorvok leader's flagship, the Vorum, looming ahead. The thought of facing them in battle sent a surge of adrenaline through him. He had fought enemies before, but this was different. This was a fight for survival, for humanity's future, and he wasn't about to lose. The first salvo hit with a thunderous roar, tearing through the silence of space. But Marcus didn't wait. He leaped into action, his body moving with a speed and precision that was almost unreal. He dodged blasts, closing the distance between his ship and the enemy flagship in seconds. As his ship neared, he activated a pulse that sent the Exorvok vessel spinning out of control. Then he jumped. In a single fluid motion, Marcus leaped from his ship and soared into the heart of the battle. With one hand, he sliced through enemy drones with an energy blade that seemed to hum with the force of 1,000 storms. His body moved like liquid, dodging fire, weaving through chaos with uncanny grace. The power he wielded felt limitless. He could see everything, anticipate every move. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt the weight of his ancestors in his bones, guiding him. The Exorvok weren't ready for this. Humanity's war gods had been dormant for millennia, but now they were awake. And they weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The battle raged on, but the tide was shifting. Marcus could feel it. Humanity wasn't just a species anymore. It was a force. And they were just getting started. The victory at Korath Colony was supposed to be a turning point. The Exorvok, beaten back and humiliated, retreated to lick their wounds, their fleets scattering to the far corners of the galaxy. Yet, the aftermath of the battle left a sour taste in Marcus Talon's mouth. The victory had been hard-earned, but it had exposed something far more troubling than the threat of the Exorvok. The emergence of humanity's war gods had thrown the galaxy into disarray. Across Earth and its colonies, new powers were awakening within humans at an unprecedented rate. What had begun as isolated incidents of strange feats, mysterious strength, heightened senses, or bursts of intelligence, soon became more pronounced. Entire groups of people started showing signs of these ancient abilities. Some were born with the potential but had never tapped into it. Others were more like Marcus, suddenly thrust into it with no warning, no understanding of what it meant. The governments of Earth, the very ones who had long feared the idea of a unified human empire, found themselves scrambling to contain what they could no longer control. The rise of the war gods was a force that no single faction could manage, and the balance of power between the ruling bodies began to falter. Some factions, politicians, military leaders, and corporate elites saw the war gods as the key to securing humanity's future. They believed they could harness the power of these beings, use them as weapons to protect humanity from external threats and rivals alike. Others, however, feared the very idea of these godlike individuals. Could anyone truly control them? Could the war gods be trusted to act in the interest of the people, or would they see themselves as rulers, destined to conquer and reshape the galaxy in their image? Marcus stood at the heart of this storm. He had always considered himself a soldier first, someone who followed orders. But now, as the media began to hail him as a hero, something far more than human, he felt the weight of his responsibility grow heavier with each passing day. What did it mean to be a leader in this new world? What was his role in a galaxy that was beginning to see humans not as vulnerable, flawed creatures, but as powerful gods reborn? He paced in his quarters, the ship's artificial gravity a reminder of how far he had come. Once, he had only been an ordinary man, a soldier doing his job. Now his body had evolved, his senses sharper, his strength near superhuman, his mind capable of processing information faster than he could speak. And yet there was still a nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. Was he truly in control of himself, or was something darker stirring within him, something ancient and predatory? It wasn't just him. He had seen others fall victim to the temptations of power. The rise of new war gods wasn't just a boon for humanity. It was a curse. Some, like General Lyra Valen of the Sol Coalition, had already begun to assert their dominance, using their powers to sway political allegiances and military decisions. Others took a more subtle approach, quietly gathering followers and creating factions that threatened to tear humanity apart. Marcus couldn't ignore it any longer. The war gods were not just defenders of humanity. They were contenders for the throne. The question wasn't whether they would fight for humanity's survival. It was whether they would fight for control of humanity's future. Ilara Ward, now working with the Council to track the rise of these new powers, had her own worries. "We've already seen a glimpse of what could happen if these powers go unchecked," she said during a briefing. "A few individuals, men and women with godlike abilities, could destabilize everything we've worked for." Marcus nodded grimly. "And we can't let that happen." The galaxy was on the brink of something monumental. The war gods were no longer ancient relics of a forgotten age. They were humanity's future. But which future would they choose? Would they unite and protect their people? Or would they plunge the galaxy into chaos, seeking to dominate or destroy anything that threatened their newfound supremacy? One thing was certain. The fight for control had only just begun. The tension between the war gods had reached a boiling point. Marcus Talon, once a soldier fighting for the survival of humanity, now found himself caught in a conflict far greater than any war he had ever known. The powers of the ancient gods within him had grown, and with them, the realization that humanity's future no longer rested solely in the hands of its governments or military leaders. The war gods were taking the reins. It had started slowly, a handful of individuals, like Marcus, who'd exhibited extraordinary abilities. But soon, those abilities weren't just limited to physical strength. Some humans could manipulate energy fields, while others tapped into the genetic memories of long-dead ancestors, recalling forgotten knowledge, from ancient tactics to lost technologies. And these abilities were growing stronger, more pronounced by the day. The political landscape had fractured. Humanity's unification, once a goal all factions had strived toward, was now a distant dream. Rival factions, with leaders who had awakened their own war godlike powers, vied for control. The Sol Coalition, once the dominant force in the galaxy, was beginning to splinter under the weight of internal struggles. General Lyra Valen, a military strategist with the power to manipulate gravitational fields, was building a personal army, using her abilities to sway entire sectors to her cause. But it wasn't just the humans with powers who were causing trouble. The Exorvok, once content to retreat after their defeat at Korath Colony, were no longer the only external threat. Other alien species, once content to remain neutral, had begun to take notice of humanity's newfound power. Some saw it as an opportunity, while others viewed it as a threat that had to be neutralized before it could spread further. Ilara Ward, ever the pragmatist, had tried to warn Marcus. "You know as well as I do, Marcus, that this isn't just about defense anymore. These powers, they could fracture us from within. You may have the strength to fight the Exorvok, but what happens when your own people turn on you?" Marcus had spent years fighting for the survival of humanity, but now he was questioning what he was truly fighting for. The more he saw the rise of individuals like General Valen, people who viewed their powers not as a means to protect, but as a way to control, the more he began to wonder if humanity was ready for the responsibility of such godlike power. The tipping point came when Marcus received an encrypted message from an unknown source. The message contained a single set of coordinates, a remote star system near the outskirts of the galaxy. It was a location he recognized, a hidden, abandoned facility, one tied to humanity's ancient history. The facility wasn't just any research station. It was one of the last remnants of the war god's old empire. Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as he studied the message. Whoever had sent it knew the truth, knew about the dormant powers within humanity, and perhaps how to control them. There was no time to waste. He rallied a small group of his most trusted allies, Ilara included, and set course for the coordinates. The stakes were higher than ever. The galaxy had been plunged into uncertainty, and the discovery of the old facility could be the key to understanding the origins of the war gods, and whether humanity could control the powers they had unleashed, or whether they would destroy themselves in the process. As the ship entered the system, a chilling thought crept into Marcus's mind. Was the message a warning or a trap? Was there someone out there who had known about this all along, waiting for humanity to awaken its power, ready to use it for their own purposes? The answers awaited them at the end of the long journey, and the only certainty was that whatever lay ahead would change everything. Humanity's fate, and the fate of the galaxy, rested on what they would find, and whether they would be strong enough to face it. The journey to the coordinates was tense, each passing moment bringing Marcus Talon and his crew closer to the unknown. The system they were heading toward was uncharted, far from the routes any civilized ships would normally take. It was a place hidden in the dark recesses of the galaxy, one where the echoes of a forgotten age still lingered. As their ship, the Vanguard, passed the boundary of the star system, a strange chill filled the air, a sense of ancient secrets stirring just beneath the surface. Ilara Ward, ever the scientist, was analyzing the data streams as they approached the coordinates. "This is unsettling," she murmured, scrolling through the scans. "The facility is ancient, much older than any human architecture we've encountered. And yet, it's still operational, at least partially. Whoever built it knew things we haven't even begun to understand." Marcus stood behind her, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind focused on the task ahead. "What kind of things are we talking about?" Ilara didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning the fluctuating readings. Finally, she spoke with quiet certainty. "This isn't just a research facility. It's a vault, a place of power. Whoever created this system, whoever left it behind, must have known the war gods were dormant inside us. They may have been trying to contain them, or perhaps manipulate them." As the Vanguard descended toward the surface of a barren moon, the facility finally came into view, a sprawling complex of structures, buried deep within a rocky valley. Its architecture was a mix of organic and mechanical, as if the building itself was alive. Some parts of the facility pulsed with strange energy, while others remained eerily still. The ship's sensors indicated the presence of energy fields that seemed to be both active and dormant, almost as if the facility was waiting for something. Marcus felt a deep, unsettling presence in the air, a sense of something ancient that had been left behind. This wasn't just a human legacy. It was something far older, something far more dangerous. The landing was smooth, though the sense of foreboding only grew stronger as the crew disembarked. The air outside was thin, almost suffocating, and the landscape around them was stark, barren. The facility loomed before them, an imposing structure of obsidian-like metal, with doors that seemed to breathe as they opened slowly, as though inviting them in. As Marcus and Ilara led the group inside, a cold silence greeted them. The interior of the facility was dark, save for the faint glow of shifting energy fields and strange symbols etched into the walls. It was like walking into the heart of a forgotten god's temple. "These markings," Ilara whispered, tracing one of the symbols with her gloved hand. "This is the language of the war gods, but it's not just a script. It's a code, a key." Marcus's gaze shifted to the central chamber ahead, where a massive structure stood at its core, a colossal stone throne, encircled by a web of ancient energy conduits. The air hummed with power, a hum that seemed to resonate deep within Marcus's chest. He felt drawn to it, as if the throne were calling to him. With a growing sense of dread, Marcus stepped forward, his footfalls echoing in the silent hall. The closer he got, the more the feeling of connection grew, Something deep inside him was awakening again. The war gods weren't just a legend. They were part of him, and they had been waiting for this moment. Ilara's voice broke through the silence, trembling. "Marcus, be careful. If we activate whatever this is, we may not be able to control it. These powers, they aren't just a gift. They're a curse." Marcus didn't respond. He didn't know if he could control it, but he was certain of one thing. Whatever this place was, whatever had been left behind, it would reveal the answers humanity needed, the answers to why their powers were awakening, and what it meant for the future of the galaxy. As he reached out toward the throne, the ground beneath him trembled. The facility seemed to awaken, its dormant energies surging to life. And somewhere, deep within the complex, something else stirred, watching them with ancient eyes. They had come too far to turn back now. The ground beneath Marcus's boots rumbled as the ancient facility came to life. A wave of energy surged through the air, vibrating with a force that seemed to reverberate not just in the chamber, but within his very bones. The throne before him pulsed with an eerie light, and he could feel its pull, as though it was calling to something deep inside him. The dormant power, the war gods, stirred within him. "Marcus, stop." Ilara's voice cut through the air, frantic. She was several steps behind him, her hand outstretched, but the urgency in her voice was lost on him. He couldn't hear her anymore, not truly. All he could hear was the thrum of energy from the throne, the sensation that his very DNA was rewriting itself. He reached out, touching the surface of the stone seat. The instant his fingers made contact, the energy flared. The room erupted with light, and a sharp, blinding pulse shot out from the throne, throwing them all back. The walls shook, and a cacophony of ancient voices filled the air, whispers of forgotten gods, of warriors long dead. It was as if the entire facility had come alive, awakening from eons of slumber. "Get back, Marcus," Ilara shouted, her voice laced with fear. "You don't know what you've unleashed." But it was too late. The power coursed through him, igniting the latent abilities within. His muscles clenched, his senses sharpened to a degree he had never experienced. He could see the flow of energy in the room, the currents of ancient power that surged like a storm. His mind raced, recalling fragments of knowledge he hadn't known he possessed. Tactics from ancient battles, strategies that had been lost to time. The war god's blood within him was awakening in full force, and with it, the memories of those who had wielded it before him. But it wasn't just power that surged through him. It was a sense of domination. The throne's pull was intoxicating, urging him to claim control. A flood of voices from the past urged him onward, their whispers growing louder, louder. Conquer, lead, rule. The words were etched into his mind like a branding iron, and for a moment, Marcus felt his will slipping, lost in the tide of ancient influence. He shook his head, struggling to maintain his focus. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a god. He was a soldier, a protector. "Marcus, you have to fight it." Ilara cried again, running forward to grab his arm. He blinked, his vision clearing as the overwhelming flood of thoughts receded, but the urge to take control remained. The temptation to seize everything was still there, lurking beneath the surface. The war gods had risen once, and the galaxy had burned in their wake. Would it be the same this time? "I can feel them, Ilara," Marcus said hoarsely, his voice trembling with the weight of the power inside him. "The voices, they want me to lead them, to reignite the old empire." Ilara shook her head. "This isn't you, Marcus. The power isn't a gift. It's a curse. You can't let them control you." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The war gods had once ruled through strength, but their empire had fallen. If humanity was to survive, it couldn't fall into the same traps. He had to resist. He closed his eyes, focusing all his will on pushing back the ancient influence. Slowly, the voices faded, and the energy in the room began to calm. Marcus took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, he was himself again, More powerful, yes, but in control. Not this time, he whispered, turning toward the rest of his team. We won't repeat their mistakes. But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of what he had just unlocked. The power, the legacy, the destiny. The war gods had been awakened, and whether humanity would learn from their past or repeat it was now a question that would define the galaxy's future. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Marcus Talon stood before the throne, the air around him crackling with the residual energy of the ancient power that had just surged through him. His team gathered around, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. Ilara was the first to speak, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. You did it, she said, though her words lacked the usual conviction. You resisted, but we've awakened something. Something that could either save us or destroy everything we know. Marcus looked down at his hands. The power within him still buzzed faintly, like an untamed current, but he had regained control. It wasn't just the war god's blood inside him. It was his will, his humanity, that kept him grounded. He wasn't a god, not yet, but the potential was undeniable. The temptation to seize it all was there, waiting for the right moment. We can't ignore this, Marcus muttered. What's inside me, inside all of us, is bigger than just us. We have a responsibility, whether we want it or not. Ilara's expression softened. You've always been a soldier, Marcus, and that's why you're the one who can make this decision. You've fought for humanity. Now it's about guiding it. But the question remains, what do we do with this power? As the words hung in the air, the reality of their situation began to settle in. The war gods had been part of humanity's distant past, but now they were part of its future. Humanity's awakening had sparked a conflict, a revolution not just among humans, but across the galaxy. Powers like Marcus's were not easily ignored, and it wouldn't be long before other factions took notice. The galaxy was a volatile place, and now humanity wasn't just a species fighting to survive. It had become a force in its own right, an unpredictable, powerful force. Marcus could already hear the distant rumblings of galactic leaders and warlords who would either seek to ally with humanity for its power or attempt to crush it before it could fully rise. We need to unite, Marcus said, turning toward his crew. Not just for Earth, but for all of humanity. If we let this power divide us, it will destroy us. The war gods didn't conquer the galaxy because of their strength. They did it because they united. We must find a way to forge a new path, one that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past. Ilara nodded. And we'll need to learn, to study what we've uncovered here. The war gods didn't just rule with power, they ruled with knowledge. If we can unlock more of it, we might stand a chance. Marcus's gaze shifted to the vast unknown beyond the facility. The war gods' ancient empire had crumbled, but now, humanity had the opportunity to rebuild, to forge something better, something that could stand the test of time. But would they be able to resist the urge to conquer, to dominate? Would they become the same tyrants they had once feared? The decision was his. The future of humanity and the galaxy lay in his hands. We'll rebuild, Marcus said, his voice steady. But we'll do it our way, not as gods. As humans, we'll face the challenges ahead together, and we won't repeat the mistakes of the past. With that, he turned away from the throne, leading the way out of the ancient facility. They had discovered their origins, their power, but the true test had just begun. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see what humanity would become. Would they be the architects of their own downfall, or would they rise as something greater, something new? As Marcus looked up at the stars, the weight of destiny pressed upon him. The war gods within him were dormant, for now. But in the silence of space, he could hear them whispering, waiting. Humanity's future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the dawn of a new age had begun.